If you ever wonder why your cakes don't turn out quite like you expected them to, even when you follow the recipe exactly, it could just be that you're not measuring correctly. And I've talked about this here before, but lately I've gotten a few comments that it doesn't really matter how you measure. And I thought that it would be good to quickly address that. So, we're going to talk about 3 sneaky mistakes that are messing up your ingredient measurements. Now, most of what I'm referring to is volume measuring, like measuring in cups. And weighing ingredients is different, but most US recipes use volume measurements. So we're going to talk about that, but we're also going to talk about weighing ingredients later on. All right, so let's get to the first mistake. And that mistake is dipping the measuring cup right into the flour bag. This will really pack that flour into the measuring cup. And I see this often, and although you'd think it's really not going to make that much of a difference, it really does. You could come out with a cake that is dry, it's more dense, all kinds of things could happen to the texture if you do that. All right, so here's the fix. Take a spoon or another measuring cup and then scoop the flour with that and just spoon it or sort of pour it into the actual measuring cup that you're using, and then level that off. And that's going to help you not pack that flour into the measuring cup. And it's a really easy fix. It can actually make a big difference though. Okay, so mistake 2 is using the wrong tools. And there is a difference between liquid and dry measuring cups. And confession here, I didn't even realize this for the longest time. But you do want to use dry ingredient measuring cups for things like flour and sugar, because you can measure more accurately with them. So what you do is you fill them up and then you level the top off, and it's a much more accurate way than just sort of filling a volume measuring cup and then shaking it and sort of trying to make sure it's level. All right, so the fix for this is to use like those sort of clear measuring cups for liquids, and then the nesting type cups for the dry ingredients. And of course you use measuring spoons and things like that for both of those. All right, so the third mistake is eyeballing instead of actually measuring. So guessing amounts or using heaping measurements or just sort of winging it and not measuring at all. And I'm not talking about vanilla here, because we all know that we measure that with our hearts. I mean just completely winging it. I'm not measuring at all. I'm just using teaspoons out of my silverware drawer and just throwing ingredients into the bowl, or I'm just dunking my measuring cup in whatever and I'm just going with whatever looks right. And I mean, maybe you're going to come out with a cake that's okay, but don't you want to know how good it could actually be if you use the exact measurements? So the fix for that is to measure, like we talked about above. You want to measure it without packing your flour into that measuring cup. You're going to spoon it in and level it off like we talked about before, and you're actually going to measure. Don't just scoop and throw in the bowl. So baking is a ratio game. There has to be proper amount of fat to liquid to flour to leavening ingredients to sugar and more. All of those ratios have to be in alignment, or it could throw the entire thing off. And it really doesn't take much to throw it off either. Now, I do get some flack sometimes about not weighing my ingredients. And yes, that actually is more accurate, but you don't have to weigh your ingredients. I mean, you absolutely can if you want to. If you like to bake and you like to be very precise and weigh your ingredients, you can go ahead and do that. But you can still make a good cake without weighing the ingredients. I generally don't weigh the ingredients myself. And honestly, it's probably easier to weigh, but I know that most people don't want to bother with that and they'd rather use volume measurements, especially here in the US, because that's just what we're used to using. And basically, that's why I write and test my recipes out with volume measurements, so it makes it easier on most people. And I want everyone to feel comfortable baking a cake from scratch, and I think ingredients by weight, sometimes it scares beginners off from even trying. And I want you to feel like you can bake whatever recipes that I have out there and that it doesn't seem too complicated. Anyway, my point is that it's your choice to weigh ingredients. You don't have to do that to get a good cake. You just have to make sure that you're measuring correctly and not just eyeballing it. The main thing though is that it really does make a difference how you're measuring, especially if you're using volume measurements. It's also not a hard thing to change. I mean, it doesn't take a lot of effort to try measuring a different way. You just Don't scoop and pack in the flour. I promise you that you're going to get a better cake out of it. All right, y'all, that is all I've got for you today. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to let me know. Happy cake baking, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.